Hello my lovelies and welcome to the Clueless Fangirl YouTube channel. I create content like this, lore videos, live streams and podcasts on Lord of the Ring or rather Tolkien's works on a weekly basis. If you want to follow me on social media, all links are in the description of this video. Enjoy! Hello my lovelies and welcome back to the third part of the First Age. Let's get to the year 490 of the First Age and Turin Turambar's story, the anti-hero of men in Tolkien's work. Like mentioned before, Turin was Hurin's only son. His mother, Morwen, sent him as a child to Thingol to Doriath, who then adopted Turin kind of as his foster son. Beleg, a commander of Thingol, became one of his few friends, and together they fought against Morgoth's orcs for many years in Doriath. Thingol also gave him an heirloom of his people, the dragon helm of Doloman. You might know Turin with this helm on from many pictures and fan arts. Not all elves, though, were keen on a human amongst their ranks, and one of them was Thingol's very close advisor, Seros. He died partly due to his own fault, but Turin definitely had a hand in, let's call it, in this accident. Fearful of the Elven King's judgment, Turin didn't ask for forgiveness or try to explain himself. He basically just flew from Doriath. He met a band of outlaws, became their leader, and lived with them in Brethil, still fighting orcs, just not on the elf side, or anyone's side really. Beleg asked his king to join his friend Turin, whom he had found before in the company of these outlaws. Thingol, who had a long time ago forgiven Turin for his deeds, gave Beleg the helm as well as the sword Anglachel. Eol was the smith of that sword, and I must say I love the stories of the swords in Lord of the Ring, and especially this one is a fascinating one. Let's quote Melian. There is malice in this sword. The dark heart of the smith still dwells in it. It will not love the hand it serves, neither will it abide with you long. Anglachel was being forged from the iron that fell from the heaven as a flaming star. And according to Melian, Eol's malice kind of was left in the sword. Seems familiar, George R.R. Martin fans? Well, back to the plot. When Beleg encountered Turin and the band of the outlaws again, they lived in the caves of the petty dwarf Mime, who soon betrayed Turin and sold him to the orcs. Beleg tried then later to free the captured Turin and other people, and even was successful. But Turin didn't recognize his friend immediately, mistook him for an orc, and killed him with Anglachel. Gwyndor and Turin barely managed to escape and went to Nargothrond, where Gwyndor originally was from. Turin was sick with grief over his friend's death, caused by his own hands, and he basically was never the same again. In Nargothrond, sick with grief and shame, Turin changed his name to, and I'm very sorry, I'm going to butcher this, I don't know how to pronounce this, Agawen, son of Umar, whatever. He even reforged the sword that killed his friend and named it Gurthang from now on. Finduilas, the daughter of Orodreth, the then king of Nargothrond, fell in love with him, but he avoided her because he knew his friend Gwyndor was already in love with her. Turin soon became a chief counselor to Orodreth, and he encouraged the people of Nargothrond and their king to abandon that practice of secrecy and attack the enemy in kind of open field. In 495, the Battle of Tummalat ended in utter destruction of the elves of Nargothrond, partly due to Turin's arrogance, I would say. Morgoth's forces attacked and sacked Nargothrond and took many prisoners, one of them being the king's daughter Finduilas, and they took her with them. Glaurung the dragon, his stare had bewitching powers, and Turin fell under the spell of the dragon. He then abandoned his original search for the people of Nargothrond and Finduilas, who were still alive, because he believed his mother and sister were in danger. He wasn't successful in finding his family in their home in Dolomin, and so he went back to his original mission in finding Finduilas, but till then it obviously was too late for that. And another little side story, and whenever I read it, I really must smile because it's so cool that Tolkien put it in there, is an encounter Turin made while looking for Finduilas, or rather the other way around. At length they, Tuor and Voronwe, so this is about Tuor, came in their journeying the ponds of Arwen, and they looked with grief on the defilement wrought by the passage of Glaurung the dragon. But even as they gazed upon it, they saw one going northwards in haste. And he was a tall man, clad in black and bearing a black sword. But they knew not who he was, nor anything of what had befallen in the south, and he passed them by, and they said no word. So Turin and Tuor actually met by accident, but they never talked to each other. Well, really, really cool. Shattered by another death of another friend, Turin went to Brethil and took on the name Turamba. His men found a naked girl on the grave of Finduilas with no memory of who she was. Turin called her Niniel, but she was no other, spoiler, than Turin's second sister, whom he never met. Time passed and both fell in love and married. Niniel even became pregnant. Their happiness didn't last long, though. Glaurung came to Brethil, and Turin, who before saw revenge on him, went for the hunt of the dragon. He even managed to kill the dragon. But while taking out his sword out of the almost dead dragon, the black blood touched him and he fell unconscious. And the dragon, with his last words, revealed to Niniel, who came for her husband, that in fact Turin was her husband and her brother. Niniel thought Turin was dead or even killed himself over the shame or the grief, what they both have done, and she then jumped off the cliffs into her death. Turin later awoke and learned what happened, but he didn't want to believe it, and he basically killed the first messenger telling him what happened. And only Mablung could convince him of the truth, and out of grief over what he has done and all his bad life choices and decisions, he killed himself with his black sword. That was the end of the House of Hurin, who before was cursed by Morgoth for his refusal of obedience. Turin and, well, Finduilas as well are one of the only people I can think of in the legendarium that actually committed suicide. And, well, overall it's a very sad and tragic story of a hero, or rather anti-hero. Still one of the more interesting ones. In the year 502, sometime after Turin's tragic death, Hurin, Turin's father, entered Menegroth, and in anger threw the Nauglamir, the treasure of Nargothrond, that came in his possession when he was searching for his family in Nargothrond, and he threw it before King Thingol and thanked him for aiding his son, and then left the Elven King's halls. After a while of owning the Nauglamir, the desire came into Thingol's heart to place the Silmaril, which he owned, in it, thus melding together two of the greatest creations made by elves and dwarves. He hired some dwarven craftsmen for the work, but by the time the dwarves were finished, they kind of had become obsessed with the Nauglamir, or I would think rather the Silmaril, and they asked for it as a payment for their labor, which, okay, ridiculous. This made Thingol very, very angry, who had kind of also grown obsessed with the jewelry, and obviously he refused to give it as a payment. The dwarves were angered by his harsh words and then killed Thingol. Dior, Baron and Luthien's son and Thingol's heir, revenged then his grandfather's death and went and killed the dwarves that were on the run. From then on, as you can imagine, the relationship of elves and dwarves only spiraled downwards. And basically each of them had their own story of what happened in Doriath. Let's skip to the year 503. Dior went to Doriath and became its next king. He started wearing the Nauglamir with a Silmaril in it, and obviously news of that came to Feanor's sons, who went to Doriath to demand their birthright, the Silmaril of their father. But Dior refused to just hand it over to Feanor's sons, who he had no dealings with. His father and mother basically gave their life for this jewel. And then the battle for the Nauglamir with Silmaril started. Telegorm, Caranthir and Curufin were slain by Dior. But the kingdom of Doriath was destroyed, and another kingslaying had taken place in the halls of Menegroth, due to a Silmaril. Dior and Nimloth, his wife, were also slain. After the attack, the servants of Celegorm left Eleret and Elurin, hope this is right, the sons of Dior, in the forest to die. Elwing, his only daughter, however, she was carrying the Nauglamir with the Silmaril, escaped with some of the people that made it alive out of Doriath to the havens of Sirion. And so the doom of the Noldor brought another kingdom that originally had nothing to do with the Oath of Feanor to fall. Let's go to the year 510. In the year 510, it was time for Morgoth for his final strike, the destruction of Gondolin. Gondolin is, to be fair, my personal favorite place in all of Tolkien's world, and the fall of the Hidden City is tragic to say the least. So I mentioned before Maeglin, Tuor's nephew, his sister's only child, lived in Gondolin and became kind of an advisor to the new High King of the Noldor. Like his father, he was a skilled craftsman, and like his father, he was friends with the dwarves of the area surrounding Gondolin. Also, I mentioned forced love, or rather unnatural love, of siblings or close relatives never ends well in Tolkien's world. We learned that Maeglin was in love with his cousin Idril, Turgon's only child and basically his heir. Idril with the time grew very suspicious of Maeglin and was avoiding him, scorned his advances cause she thought them unnatural. And things got worse when Tuor came to Gondolin, the city his father and his uncle had been guests many years before. Turgon welcomed Tuor, a mortal man wearing exactly that armor, helm, shield. Turgon left in Vinyamar as Omo asked him to. So Turgon knew this must be the chosen man that first Omo foretold him would come and aid Gondolin, but also the man Huor talked about. Turgon even allowed Idril and Tuor, who fell in love with each other not soon after he arrived in Gondolin, to wed, as he remembered what Huor said. Their two houses would be joined, and out of that union a new star and hope would arise. Well, that star was the half-elven Earendil, son of Idril and Tuor. Fun side note on the name Earendil and his story. Unfortunately, the Earendil story, although one of the most important ones, I would say, in the legendarium, is not very fleshed out, as Tolkien changed it many times and never really finished it. So his story later on is just a fragment of what Tolkien originally planned for Earendil and the whole story and the whole plot. And as for the name, Tolkien read the name in an old Anglo-Saxon poem about Christ, and he was so intrigued about the name. In my What Books to Read in What Order video, somewhere linked here, you can learn more about the story in specific. But let's go back to Gondolin now. You can imagine all this wasn't to Maeglin's taste. The woman he lusted for was married to a mortal man out of all. And not only that, but Turgon trusted Tuor, and he quickly rose in power and in status, and both became very close. While traveling out of Gondolin, Maeglin was captured by orcs and brought before Morgoth. He was tortured and then promised the city and the girl if he would tell Morgoth the location of the hidden city, which unfortunately Maeglin did in the end. And again, Maeglin was definitely not an evil elf per se. But I love that the elves in the Silmarillion and other works besides Lord of the Ring have a deeper level and various character traits, good and evil. He was allowed to return, knowing Morgoth would attack one day, which he did in the year 510. And this time Morgoth was victorious in coming for his enemy Torgon. He attacked with balrogs and dragons, with orcs and all the foul creatures you can imagine. The city couldn't be held. I don't want to go too deep, but the Battle of Gondolin is very detailed and epic, and we learn about all of the great houses and warriors like Ixelion and Glorfindel. Torgon died defending his city, as did most of the inhabitants. Tuor slay Maeglin and escape with his son and wife and a few other elves by a secret passage Idril did build in secret, knowing something was off since Maeglin returned. Tolkien actually began writing the story that would become the Fall of Gondolin in the year 1917. So this was basically one of his first works. Yeah, so let's move to the year 530, when Eärendil married Dir's daughter Elwing. So Eärendil and Elwing married, and they brought together the two great houses of the Noldor, and actually all three tribes of the elves. Both had twin sons, of whom at least you will know one, Elrond and Elros, in the year 532. Like his father, Eärendil was a mariner, and he loved the sea. And one day he was away, and the havens were attacked in the year 538 by the sons of Fëanor, who thought their time had come to reclaim the Silmaril, which was in Elwing's possession, as I said before, because she got it from her father before the fall of Doriath. She then threw herself into the waters because she didn't want to be captured by the sons of Fëanor. And Ulmo, he was a friend of the elves, and he loved her family, and he felt pity for her and her faith, and he gave her the likeness of a white bird, and she was holding the Silmaril in front of her breath, that white bird. She flew towards her husband, whom she found, and told him of what had happened in the havens. Eärendil, who before as a child witnessed what happened to Gondolin and everything, and what might and will happen in the future, decided to sail west and to plead with the Valar and ask them for help defeating their real enemy, Morgoth, who caused all this in the end. And while her husband spoke to the Valar, Elwing went to Aqualonde and told the Teleri about the evil deeds of Morgoth and the destruction of the elves of Middle-earth. She even managed to persuade them to sail their ships for the host of Valinor. So, in the end, the half-human, half-elf, Eärendil, the mariner, convinced the Valar to go to war with Morgoth. This was the last war of the First Age, the so-called War of Wrath. In 545, the Valar and the Vanya elves, as well as the Teleri of Aman, reunited with the forces of the Noldor and Teleri and all Sindar that were left in Middle-earth as the dwarves and the men. The war lasted around 40 years, and the host of the Valar almost managed to utterly defeat the orcs of Morgoth and their armies, but he had one last ultimate weapon he could release, the winged dragons, which had never been seen before. And they drove the Valar back and nearly destroyed the host of the west. But fortunately, Eärendil came with his skyship Vingilort, along with the eagles of Manwë, led by Thorondor. And in the skies above Angband, they confronted the dragons, and Eärendil himself slew their captain, the mighty Ancalagon the Black, who then broke the towers of Thangorodrim with his fall. Angband was overrun, and Morgoth was finally captured in the deepest of his minds. He was bound again with the old chain he knew from before, Angainor, and the two Silmarils still in his possession were taken by the Maya Eonwe, the herald of Manwë. Morgoth was taken to Aman, went to trial for his crimes, and in the end the Valar beheaded Morgoth, thrusting him through the doors of the night beyond the walls of the world into the timeless void. And from then on, the doors were guarded by Eärendil until the doomsday would come. again. In the end, due to the War of Wrath, Middle-earth's shape changed, and almost nothing was like it was before. Some elves went to the west, but many stayed and rebuilt or built new kingdoms. But more on that in the video of the Second Age of Ada. And if you want to read more on the events of the First Age, I would suggest to obviously go for the Silmarillion. But Tolkien's son Christopher also published 3 books on the main storylines, or the 3 great tales as they're called, based on unfinished texts and notes of his late father. The easiest read, I'd say, is The Children of Húrin, basically the story of Húrin's family and especially the Turin-Turambar storyline, which I find the most intriguing one. The other book is Beren and Luthien, and the third and last published book is The Fall of Gondolin. I did a video, as I mentioned before, on which books to read and in what order, and you can check it out and decide if you want to go a bit deeper than the Silmarillion and read those books or not. So, thank you for listening, and bye bye, my lovelies.